welcome to another Garage Time with Goody. Today what we're going to be doing, we're going to be changing out the right CV axle, which is also the driver's side CV axle on a 2014 Dodge Journey 3.6 liter engine, all-wheel drive. Well, let's get to it. I want to buy replacement CV axles. I will leave a link in the video description showing you where I purchased mine, but ultimately it is up to you where you want to purchase yours. If you purchase from the same place that I did, you will see there are two different part numbers here. You will see the first number at the top, the track number is CH-8118. A1 number is 60-3521. If you look this up and Google it, you will see this is to the front driver's side. So, in order for it not to get confused, I'm just going to take a marker and I'm just going to write FD on it for front driver. Now we come over here to the front passenger side, and it is going to say track number CH-8116. The A1 number is 60-3522. And I'm going to write FP for front passenger. Now that is optional for you to do this. A reason you would want to do this is so that you don't get confused of which side goes where. But obviously, if you do these all the time, since each side looks physically different, you would be able to tell. But if you're a beginner, this will help you in not getting the two confused. What I'm going to do first is take the center rim cap or hub cap off the center. And I'm just using a small flathead screwdriver to do that. Pops right off of there. And this is going to expose the axle nut. This axle nut, you're going to want a 32 millimeter or a 1 1/4 socket. I'm going to go ahead and try to break it loose, but not take it off all the way. What I'm going to do to make this bolt come out easier, I'm going to spray some PB Blaster and let it saturate in there for about 10 minutes. And then just step away and let it soak. I'm going to try the impact gun and see if that will break the axle nut loose. And if not, I will use a breaker bar. And it is broke loose, as you can see. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jack up both sides of the car. And the reason I'm going to jack up both ends is because once the car is in the air, once I get down to the axle, I'm going to need to turn the axle to the left or to the right to adjust the locking pin. You'll see what I'm talking about here in a few minutes in the video. Ready? Okay, so what I'm doing now, on the opposite side, on the passenger side, I'm going to jack the car up, and then I'm going to put a jack stand underneath. So the wheel is about 1 to 2 inches off the ground. So it'll be able to spin when I'm working on the driver's side. All right, I'm going to place the jack stand underneath. Then I'm going to let down the jack because I'm going to need the jack on the other side. Okay, the same with this side. I'm going to jack up the car until it's about 2 inches off the ground on this side. And then I'm going to place the jack stand underneath. I'm going to make a note here. If you have an impact gun, you can go ahead and take these lug nuts off once the car is jacked up, because it's going to spin fast and just take them off. If you're taking these off with the lug wrench, you want to take these lug nuts off before you jack the car up. I just wanted to make that clear. Okay, I have an impact gun, so I can take it off once the car is jacked up. And that's what I'm doing now. You're going to need a 19 millimeter socket. I'm going to remove these lug nuts and then remove the tire. Now this tire came off very easy. If your tire is stuck, you're going to hit it at 12, 3, 6, and 9, and it should come right off. The second thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove these two 13 millimeter bolts. These go to two different brackets. One is the hydraulic brake hose, which is right here, and the other is the ABS, anti-lock brake wiring harness. So I'm going to go ahead and remove those. Here we go. We're going to take this off. It's 13. And you'll see that the metal tab goes up against this, this notch right here. If you get confused, you can rewind this video at any time. You can see where these tabs line up and where they fit into place. So we want to make sure that these wires are safe and out of the way. Now, while I have this open, I'm going to go ahead and spray the rest of the bolts down with PB Blaster so it can saturate in, be dissolving that rust, and make it easier for the bolts to come out. We're going to need some right here and right here on the bracket where the wheel knuckle connects to. Those are the two 21 millimeter bolts that I'm spraying down. And on the caliper bolts, I'm going to spray behind on the 21 millimeter bolts that holds the caliper on. And then I'm going to let that soak in for about 10 minutes. And then I'm going to go ahead and start removing the entire caliper. Since we're not changing the brakes are okay, we're going to remove the entire caliper. See the whole brake caliper. This is the caliper itself. And if you're going to change the brakes, you would take off this bolt and this bolt. But since we're taking the whole caliper off, back here closer to the CV axle, this is the CV axle boot, you'll have this bolt and this bolt, and that will remove the whole caliper. And that's what I'm going to take off. So once these 21 millimeter bolts are coming out, you're going to want to have either a bungee cord or a hanger so that you can hang it to the struts, and then you'll be able to put the caliper out of the way. I'm going to go ahead, take out the first 21 millimeter bolt. Now when I take out the second one, I am going to hold on to the caliper so it doesn't drop. If you saw there that it tried to give way and you don't want it to fall, you just kind of pull, keep it in place, and just pull straight out, and it comes out with the brake pads and everything. And now I'm going to get the bungee cord, the nut on the end of the bolt. And then, as you can see, you can get a better look right here on the top one. I'm going to put the wrench, the box side up against this bolt, and this side up against the head of the bolt. That's exactly how you get the bolt loose. I'm going to do over here on this side is, since I'm not going to take the plastic off, it's kind of brittle for the ABS line, I'm also going to take this bracket off right here. I'm going to use a swivel socket, and it's a 13 millimeter, and just back this bolt out. And see, this bolt right here is just going to come right on out. And what that does is it gives more slack on that ABS line. I have put these nuts flush with the end of these bolts, and I'm just going to lightly tap on each bolt. There's 2 of them, and I'm going to get this to come back so that I'm able to take out the wheel knuckle. See, as you can see, that came right out. Underneath it, done the same thing, and I can go ahead and take those nuts out by hand. There's 1, and there's 2. Then I can lightly tap them the rest of the way out. Now, it is optional. You could use a rubber hammer if that makes you feel safer, that you don't damage the threads. But if you lightly tap, you're not going to damage them. You just pull these out, and then before taking the top bolt out all the way, now what you need to do is just go ahead and take the axle nut out all the way. And if you can't push this in and out, you're going to have to free the axle. And how you do that is with a punch. Right here where this indentation is, and you just hammer it back with this punch. And now, if you can move this with the spline, see how it's going all the way back? It'll actually go flush. Well, it's broke loose now. Since it is broken loose, I'm just going to go ahead and take this bolt out. Now I should be able to move the wheel knuckle out and set it over this way. Make sure you don't get too much tension on the anti-lock brake. This is what it looks like once you have freed it, and it should give you enough clearance so that you can pull this out from the splines and then bring it out like so. Now you will see that there is this washer that goes up against the metal housing of this CV axle. Do not lose this washer, and if you have a new one, I recommend using the new one. If not, go ahead and reuse the old one. I'm going to set that there. And with that being out, we are ready to start on the next step to removing the CV axle. Driver's side, you're going to want to hold this CV axle level, and the reason why I jacked up the passenger side is so that I can move this CV axle. The reason being, I will show you when I get this out, there's a little metal retainer that locks these in, and you turn this just 1/4 of an inch at a time, and once the ring, if it's this way, it's locked, but if you take it to 12 o'clock where it's facing up, it'll drop down and release these axles. As you can see right here where the CV axle goes into the transmission, I'm going to put a pry bar right here and try to get it to back out. And then it looks like it's almost in position. I might have lucked out the other side I didn't look out so much, but it looks like it's in the position to come on out, and that retainer pin is in the 12 o'clock position. So I'm going to try to pull on the axle. Now pull. Look, coming out. And as you can see, that just pulled out. And the axle is out. Ironically, right there's the pin I was talking about, that it was in the 12 o'clock position. And I'll explain that more here in a second. Now, once the axle is out, you'll want to go ahead and check the axle seal around it. Make sure it's not been leaking around it. And if you see no signs of leakage or anything like that, you're ready to install the new CV axle. The one on the driver's side, to me, is a lot easier than the passenger side. What I was trying to explain, the easy tip for removing a CV axle is as simple as this. You see this ring that goes around this indentation and the splines? I'm going to call it the retention ring. Well, this retention ring has a hole in it roughly about the size of ½ an inch. Well, you'll want that hole to be facing 12 o'clock straight upward, because when it does, it will hang down and it will be in the unlock position. If it's hanging to the right or the left, it's in the lock position. To remove or to insert the axle, you will want to make sure that that retention ring is facing at 12 o'clock straight up. So that's what I want to do when I install it. I've got this in the 12 o'clock position, and I'm going to take it, put the spline in, and push it back. And then what you do, once it's in place, you hit against it pretty hard a couple of times, and you can feel it click in. Then, as you can see here, since I pushed on the axle, this is flush. It is flush into the transmission and locked into place. With that being in place, I'm ready to continue the installation. Okay, you'll take this clamp where the metal tab goes in the hole in the top, and you'll start this in by hand. This is a 10mm bolt, by the way. We'll start that in, and you'll only need like 8 foot-pounds, but I'm just going to go ahead and snug it in with the impact. And then that's on there just like that. I'm going to torque to 20. And at any given time, you can move this caliper in any direction you want. And if it's in your way, move that caliper out of the way, as long as it's on the bungee cord. Before you put this axle back into the hub, you're going to not want to forget this washer. On the passenger side, there's a washer and a rubber O-ring. On this driver's side, there is just this washer. So put this washer on, and it just goes up against the metal like that. I'm going to move it back over to the left. I'm going to line up the splines, and these are the splines right here. You want to line it up with the wheel and the wheel bearing, and it should just push in just like that with about 5 pounds of force, not very much. And then on the wheel hub bracket, or on the wheel knuckle, wheel hub, whatever you want to call it, on the bracket, you line it up with these 2 bolt holes, the 2 21mm bolt holes. You got to remember, the head of the bolts are going to face the front of the car, and the end of the bolts are going to face the back of the car. So you go ahead, and if you have problems getting one in, you can move the wheel knuckle back and forth like I'm doing here because the bottom one isn't wanting to line up right off. So I'm going to move it back farther. See, I'm pushing this back until it lines up. And see, they are lined up now. And what I'm going to do to get these grip threads, this is what I call them, the grip threads on these bolts, to get them in there, I'm just going to tap on the bolts, and then it's in there. And then I'm going to, by hand, I'm going to start those 21 millimeter nuts onto these bolts. Bracket, there's two bolts. There's one on the bottom, this one in by a wrench, and if it ever gets too tight, it'll come down on the dust shield and it'll be able to hold it. But I'm confident I'll be able to hold it. I'm going to go ahead and tighten it up snug for now, and then after that I will torque spec it down. I will tell you the torque specs then. I'm going to torque the 21 millimeter bolts that is connected to the strut mount here and the wheel knuckle. Okay, I set the torque wrench to 65 foot-pounds, and I have a 5-inch extension with a 21 millimeter socket. And these two bolts, I'm going to go ahead and tighten them down to the 65 foot-pounds. Those are torqued down. I will torque down the axle nut. It is just snug right now. I will torque it down to 118 foot-pounds when I get everything else back together. Okay, next, you're going to want to put your rotor on. Make sure it goes on nice and flush. And also, as you're putting your rotor on straight, you're going to want to make sure the dust shield is not bent any, because if it's bent and it moves, you'll hear a scraping sound. Next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to unhook the caliper bracket, and you're going to have to line it back up exactly how it came out, because the brakes are in there. You're going to fit the brakes in between the rotor. You won't have to reset the brake pistons, and you're just going to hold it up like that. You want to go ahead and start the 21 millimeter bolts into the threads by hand so that the caliper won't fall off. Alright, next we're going to take the hydraulic brake hose, and as you can see, it has this little metal tab, and it's going to go up against this bracket right here. It's on the strut assembly here. I'm going to start it by hand. And again, you only need about 8 pounds, 8 foot-pounds of pressure to torque this down. The second little metal bracket is the ABS, and it's right here. It has this metal tab, and it's going to go on top of this one, which is the hydraulic brake bracket that I just bolted down. And it's going to get it started by hand right there. And I'm just going to go from the side with a 13 millimeter socket. Then they're in place. That's good. One of the last things you need to do is put the tire back on the lug studs. And I always use my feet to hold the tire up. And then I just start the lug nuts by hand. And one of the reasons why you want to do it by hand is that's less of a chance they'll get cross-threaded. If you put it on by an impact first, it'll just drive it on there no matter what, and you could cross-thread it. Now I still have to torque that axle nut to 118 foot-pounds, which I'm going to do after I get this tire installed and let this car back on the ground. I use a 19mm deep well socket, and I'm going to go into a crisscross pattern because that way the metal behind the tire will go flush up against the rotor. What I'm doing now is I'm letting down the passenger side because I had both sides jacked up about 2 inches off of the ground so that I could move those CV axles back and forth. But in fact, I was actually replacing the driver's side CV axle. So in the last steps, I'm going to take the jack stand out from under the passenger side with the jack. I'm going to let the jack down. Then I'm going to go to the other side and do the same thing and take the jack out. Okay, now that everything's back on the ground, you're going to want to torque the lug nuts to 116 foot-pounds. Okay, lug nuts are all torqued down. Next, last but not least, we're going to torque down the axle nut. It is going to be torqued to 118 foot-pounds. Now, if you ask the question, does it really matter how hard you torque this down? Yes. Too less, it could work its way back off. Too much, and it could wear out prematurely. And so you have to get it within about 10 pounds of spec usually. So I'm going to torque it down to 118 foot-pounds. And the center cap goes right here, and you just snap it in, just one little punch, and it's locked in. Thank you for tuning in to another Garage Time with Goody. Until next time, another one bites the rust.